Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Brief Let's Talk About It podcast. I am Tony Lynch. I am your host. Now, before we get started, as always, we bring in some amazing guests to you guys. Um, and today we got an amazing story for you. Now, before we get started, I want to say that this is for educational purposes only. And secondly, if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head on over to that YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time we drop a new episode. And also, if you guys have questions, please put them in the comments and we'll get those questions answered as we go along. And if you know anyone who could benefit from these conversations that we have, please share it with them. Now, my next guest, Daniel DeFABIO. We talk about child loss, right? And then we talk about the different types. And I know for a lot of people, it's a very sensitive subject, but that's the reason why we had these conversations. My guest is amazing. He does some amazing work. He's been doing some amazing things, but I won't do it justice, right? So I'm gonna bring the man himself up here and let him tell you all about it. And you guys, please sit back and enjoy. All right. Without further ado, here we go. Daniel.
Hey, Tony.
How you doing, my brother?
I'm
Welcome
doing
to the
all right.
show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this work.
No, man, you as well, man. You as well. We had a great conversation, man. And I'm honored to be able to showcase your story and bring awareness to the rare disease disorder. So introduce yourself to people where you're from.
Sure. My name's Daniel DeFABIO. I live in the upstate New York area near Saratoga Springs or Albany, New York. And what put me in the category of someone grieving, and I had to learn there are so many different kinds of grieving. When we had our first child, within a year, we got a diagnosis for Lucas, and that diagnosis was a rare disease called Menkes Syndrome. And with it came a whole list of he will not, he cannot, it's not likely that he will walk, talk, sit up straight. So each of those things, we didn't necessarily know it right off the bat, was something to grieve, those
Right.
diagnoses, that prognosis. But the prognosis was that he would live 3 to 10 years. So right there is the beginning. Most people, a lot of people don't get a warning, and no warning is an absolute, it's going to have a chance of, right, attached to it. But I guess what I'm getting at is a different type of grief than the sudden unexpected death, or a different type of grief than the elderly grandparent who was headed that way. And maybe it's in some ways their time. I mean, it sounds terrible to say their time, but you see it coming, and maybe it even in certain cases feels like maybe it's better that they don't hang on and suffer longer. But
Right.
for a 1-year-old to have a timeline that's less than 10 years was a game changer for my wife and I. And a little bit early into the process, we were at a support group, and somebody said, you're grieving the reality you thought you would have as a parent and with a child, and you now know it's going to be something different. And because it's going to be something different, you get to and have to grieve your original plan, right? Your original plan to raise them to adulthood and have them outlive you, and all those, we have so many sort of baked in expectations that we take for granted. You take for granted that he'll, finish school, or that he'll find someone to love. And, those things weren't in the likely future for us anymore. So my wife had a little bit more experience with grief than I did, and she latched onto that, and she said, oh, okay, if you're telling me this is about grief, I'm somewhat familiar here. I'm somewhat capable of dealing with this. So it it was a help for both of us, and to know that that was the kind of language we needed, right? Those were the conversations we needed to have, and we could put a name on it, and wasn't just horrible, terrible feelings that you couldn't. I mean, maybe we couldn't understand them, but at least we could name them. And then you could find the book that was written on it, or the person that could be a counselor for it, or, So it was a it was a worldview change for sure.
Definitely when that's this is the one club that I don't wish anyone would ever join, right? Yeah, which is child loss. We talk about that, and even if you got a diagnosis in a time frame, I have to ask myself, does it make it better, right? Because as you said, when it happens, you still grieve in the life that you had. You still grieve the life that they would have had, the plans, so forth and so forth. And I know, right? So I know from my perspective because I've had to walk my own journey and grieve those same things, which I didn't really understand either, right? But no one, I guess, no one said that my son was going to pass away, so it's little bit different. His was sudden, and I'm from unknown causes, nonetheless, right? And so I think about that, and I listen to yours. I'm like, well, with the diagnosis, can you prepare? Is there any really preparing yourself for that, right? You know what I'm saying? And I don't know. For me, I would have to say no, right? You know what I'm saying? Because like you said, there's always that what if that's attached to it. Well, what if?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That sense of hope I think we talked about this as well.
Yeah. I think you probably can never, even with warning, you can never prepare yourself for the feelings and the emotion and the impact. I guess what you get a little bit, not exactly preparation for, but you get eased into, because most things that we grieve are a shock event, right?
Right.
It's a thing we didn't expect to happen, and it usually comes on suddenly, and that's part of what we're reacting to. So
Mm-hmm.
for us, the shock was a little bit, it was 10 years in the making, right? It was,
Right.
and I don't know that helps a whole lot. I mean, at least it took the sharp impact out of it, maybe. But along that way is it's like having something hanging over your head. Is
Right.
every cold or flu that Lucas got, is that just a cold or a flu, or is that a big deal that's going to set off a whole series of events and take us to the hospital? And is each hospital visit like something we're going to manage through and get through, or is this going to be the one that's the last one? And eventually, um, to get to the end of the story early, I suppose, um, 11 told he had months, not years at this point. Now, age 11, we had already beaten the basic prognosis, the 3 to 10 year estimate. So, did we get some extra time with him? Is that one way to look at it? Some bonus time. But even so, with all that sort of us thinking we had embraced the reality and adjusted to the new reality, when they said you have months, not years, I went into, and I think my wife did too, I went into optimistic mode. Like, how many months, right? If you're saying not years, it must be less than 12 months, but could it be 9 months? Maybe that's good. And sure enough, the way it unfolded was 6 months. So he was 11 and a half, and it was June of 2020. And that hospital stay was 6 days, 4 surgeries, and he just couldn't, it was, in technically the surgeries were successful. They let us go home, but
Mhm.
I think they just exhausted him. He was at his end. He couldn't recover. He couldn't handle what needed to happen to keep going there. And uh, so, the numbers don't matter, but in the sense that we cling to anything that can guide us. So when that doctor said months, not years, he was right in that range because it was 6 months, and we never would have believed it. We were always so optimistic about things, even in the face of it. It was a weird thing to be. I don't think in any kind of denial. We were very um, receptive to the hard realities, right? We would try to take the bad news as it came, and what can we do with it? Uh and yet it's still, it's not what you want. Your mind fights against it. You look for the You look for the ways that it's not going to be just yet. It's not going to be this time. It might be some time down the line. And eventually, the end of the line comes, and we never would have been ready. I don't think there's a way to get ready, but because of this was kind of the height of pandemic times, I guess I could say it did us a favor in a way. Everybody was staying home, right? And if you were told, if anyone listening is told you're going to lose someone you love and there's nothing you can do about it, probably the thing you would do about it is say, I'm going to spend more time with that person. This is my
Yeah.
last chance. And that's kind of what was happening just in our lives because of pandemic. We were all in the house, nobody was leaving, and Lucas was getting the thing he loved the most, which is more of our attention, more of our time. He, on a normal day, he might not see us till 5 p.m. We're busy working, his brother's at school. And then 5 p.m. rolls around and he gets this look on his face where he's anticipating us and he wants, and it's this sly little grin of like, oh, you're coming over to be with me now, aren't you? And that, yeah, it made you feel so great. He loved nothing
Yeah.
better than to be with us, right? And and what a great blessing that is to feel so unconditionally loved and so needed and so valued. And you see yourself a little bit through his eyes, these bright blue, amazing eyes. Um, and then when we change up the schedule because of COVID and we're around more often, and he gets this crazy, almost can't trust what he's perceiving look on his face, like, are you spending time with? And I don't know that he not only couldn't talk and couldn't eat and sit up straight and walk, but he had some intellectual disability, so we're not sure, could he really track time, the way you or I would. He wouldn't say it's 5 o'clock, but he might have
Right.
this internal clock rhythm that says, this is the time. It's getting a little dark. This is the time you come hang out with me. And when we got off that schedule and he got more time with us, boy, he just gave us this devilish grin, like, am I getting a bonus session here? Are you going to be with me a little
Yeah.
bit more? So I'm really glad. I mean, it sounds terrible. There's nothing good about losing someone. There's nothing good about a pandemic, except for us, this one particular detail kind of worked in our favor, that we were given the focus we would have chosen was sort of pushed upon us, right? The focus on
Right.
your family, the focus on your child.
Well, when you say that, I'm listening to your conversation. I don't think it was really a push for you and the wife. I think that was a natural thing, right? You know what I'm saying? Because um, as parents, I think we love spending time with our children. We love watching them grow. We love taking in the moments with them. And when I say that from my own personal self, I I am so glad I didn't miss a moment, right? And it changed. It definitely changed. And what happened was that it made me appreciate those moments that I didn't take for granted. Those moments where, you know, I didn't lay on the couch and veg out and watch movies and things like that. But I actually took the time. My heart said, "Hey, go out there and ride that skateboard with him. Hey, go out there and push him on his bike. Hey, let's go climb a tree and things like that." I know I'm speaking, from my perspective, so I mean no disrespect or to take away from your situation whatsoever. These are just my moments that I remember, and your moments are totally different from there, right? Say you got the devious grin, and it reminds me because when you said it reminds me of a cartoon I used to watch and really innocent one too. I think it was like Raggedy Ann and Ann or something like that back in the day. And the little smile that they always had on their face, like I see you, right? You know what I'm saying? And I can only imagine from your story that you're saying, I see you over there. You're trying to sneak up on me, and I can only imagine him playing that game in his head with you, right? And you entertaining it.
Yep, absolutely. And it's funny that you said sneak up on me because with his very limited physicality. He couldn't move himself. He'd have to be in a wheelchair if he wanted to move. But yet,
Right.
one of his favorite things, if you wanted to even play with a toy, they had to be these adapted toys with a great big switch because he couldn't hit a small thing. He'd only hit a big thing, right? And
Mhm.
so at his school, they'd have this, I think it was an alligator, that if he hit the big switch, the alligator would shoot out about 3 or 4 feet. And he would, now obviously with the help of teachers, and whose idea was it first, I can't tell you, but he would he would lie in wait with that like a booby trap. So if his friends or another teacher came by, he could launch the alligator at them, and he'd just crack up. So, yeah, there was deviousness, there was definite sort of lying in wait kind of craftiness for the kid that you didn't think could do very much. He found his ways. He certainly touched people and connected with people, and I
Now,
think you know gave us, nobody needs this kind of permission in their lives. We should all just know it, from the get-go. But you still you, I think too many of us wait for a game changer to come along. And you know as much as we hear tomorrow's promised to nobody, right? Or live today as if it's your last day, that kind of thing, right? But that
yeah,
seems, we still want to feel like we're closer to immortal or death is way off in the distance. So we sort of ignore that mentality, I think, and probably to our detriment, right? So when you have something a little more concrete, like a child's prognosis that they won't live very long, it helped us embrace that mindset that, hey, time with him is precious, all time is precious, our time is precious. So to the extent that we can, you can't do nothing but love your child. You have to go to work and stuff like that. But um we were able to shift our priorities and really focus on him and his brother, and just ask ourselves, for example, we certainly could have done a make-a-wish thing, a trip somewhere, go swim with the dolphins or go to Disneyland or whatever. But we knew that wasn't for him. That wasn't his priority. His priority was just spend more time with us. So
right.
we could do that. And we tried to do that. We tried to make sure that was a priority. So
Now, for the audience who's listening in, this disorder is a very rare disorder. Explain people what it to what it is, because you never know
yeah,
who's listening. There may be somebody out there that's there, they just got diagnosed, or someone they love just got diagnosed with this. You come from a place of personal experience. Explain it what it is, and then take us back to
yeah.
the moment when you get that diagnosis, and the steps that you took to learning about it.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because it is important to me that more people know about Menkes disease, also nicknamed kinky hair syndrome. And one of the first symptoms you might see is that the hair is brittle and twisted, and you'd probably have to look at a microscope to see that it's twisted, but it'll snap off. So the back of his head, even as he grew up to have hair, would always rub off and be a bald spot wherever his head touched another surface. So
Mhm.
that could be a clue if you're seeing a geneticist, or maybe a neurologist, but you have to be seeing these specialists. And why would you know to do that? And turns out, in our case, after a year, about 9 months, he had had a few developmental delays, and somebody said, you need to go see a geneticist. And luckily we did. And that particular geneticist had seen Menkes syndrome before, because most doctors have never heard of this. This is something that affects maybe 1 in 250,000 people. So it's
Wow.
not only a rare disease, some people call that an ultra rare disease. And luckily this geneticist was familiar. He had seen a couple other patients, and he looked at the hair and he said, I'm going to run some tests. We're going to test for copper. And the reason for that was Menkes syndrome means your gene, the ATP7A gene, which produces this protein, which for you and I delivers all the copper your body needs, because you don't have to have a special diet. We just get enough copper. There's some in chocolate, but there's some in other stuff too. And you're just going to
Right.
you don't need very much. You're going to get enough copper. It's not a problem, unless this gene isn't doing its job. And so Lucas wasn't metabolizing that copper and getting it to the cells that need to go to, and most specifically crossing the blood brain barrier. So with Menkes syndrome, your hair, hair, muscles, and brain don't develop enough correctly on the normal trajectory. So we saw those delays in him, and it was good in a way to get a diagnosis because at least again you know the name for what you're talking about. But it was horrible bad news. There's no good news there, except
Right.
in some cases, Menkes disease is one of the few rare diseases that has a treatment. Although the particular of that treatment is you need to start it in the first 10 days of life. And here we are, he's age 1, and we just got the diagnosis. Now, he had happened to spend his first 10 days of life in a NICU unit, and neurology was checking him out because he had a head fracture when he was born. So we were in the right place at the right time with the right people, and still nobody knows about this. Nobody says, oh, I think I want to run a test. And you got to do a genetic test. I want to run a test and see if this is Menkes syndrome, because that's what it would take. And now I've learned 2/3 of cases are inherited, and ours was in the 1/3 that was a spontaneous or de novo mutation. So unless you've got the inheritance and you know about it in your family, you're not going to think to test for this thing. So part of the reason I took up advocacy and awareness was I could see a very clear path. If we get more kids diagnosed, we get them treated, we avoid, and those kids with the treatment can live, longer lives, into their 30s, 40s with very minimal symptoms. You could look at them and not know if there's anything wrong with them. So I'm glad and I can't take very much credit for this at all. The Menkes Foundation does the hard work here for sure, but they have gotten states, because you have to go state by state, to include a disease on the newborn screening. So once it's possible, and for a while it wasn't possible, the technology just wasn't there, but then we got a genetic test that could be used as a newborn screening. Then you have to say, okay, let's get this on the RUSP, which is the recommended universal screening program. And once it's on the RUSP, each state decides, well, are we actually going to test for this at birth? And so right now we're at about 6 states in the US that are doing it. And New York, where I live, is one of them. So that's progress, but we'd feel a lot better if it was 50 states. So there's work
It's
to be
very
done
true.
for sure. Yeah.
Hey, you know what? Thank you for the work that you're doing because, until I met you, I never even knew nothing about it. So, thank you for the education and the awareness and putting it out there so others that they know what to look for, right? And so that's truly,
Yeah.
truly amazing.
And the great thing
Now,
there is if you like I said, you don't want one of these diagnoses, but it's the right name to put on the thing. And when you have that, you and I talked before about, you've all in any situation in life, you got to find your people. And
right,
when your people are part of rare disease, they're harder to find. So you better have the right name to go looking. So I was able to find the people. There's about 60 or so in the world right now that I know of that have Menkes syndrome, and talk to those people, and they became my tribe. And it's a great comfort, and it's the best first step I can recommend to anybody. However, what I wanted at the time was that their experience would be predictive of my experience. And just like you
right,
find with grief, nobody grieves the same. And some of these genetic diseases, yeah, we've got the same gene mutated, we've got the same biology happening here, but the way it presents in different kids, there's a spectrum of how severe or less severe it is for certain kids. So even these other Menkes families weren't too predictive of what would happen for us. So it was comfort, but it wasn't the answers that I was desperate for. Some of the answers,
right,
but not all of the answers. And then, if you fast forward a few years, when we lose Lucas, I mentioned this to you, I realized now I need to find my people again. I need to find this
right,
subset of my people, not just the rare disease families, not just the Menkes disease families, but those that have lost their child to a rare disease is this smaller and smaller group that I'm looking for. And then as you're focused on, and why I value what you're doing so much, so many of the people in that space are the moms, not the dads.
right,
Whatever, they're the primary caregiver, or they're the ones who reach out on social media more, whatever that dynamic is. It's usually the women representing and not so much the men. So if I want the men to talk to about this, I've got an even smaller target I'm trying to hit. So I'm very grateful to you for being one of those that I can talk with.
But it's my honor to be able to provide that space for us men to be able to talk with, right? Um, and I think a lot of times what happens, and I think you noticed this as well. Men don't talk around women. We just don't, right? Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from our upbringing, right? From what we see, from what we're taught about how men are supposed to be. And then on top of there, men by nature are competitive. We got to prove that we're the provider, that we can be good protectors, and things like that. So when it comes down to it, when women are added into the equation, men compete for that acknowledgement, and it takes away from what we actually have going on. And you eliminate all of that. You put us in a room by ourselves, especially when people can relate to what you're talking about, right? Going through some of the things. Oh, it takes the conversation to a whole new level, right? It takes it to a whole new level. It opens it up. You can be vulnerable. You can laugh. You can share stories. You can support each other. And that, to me, that's a beautiful thing. And that's the purpose of it, to be there for one another, because it's easy for us to turn around and walk the other way, um, because we don't want to deal with something and everything. So now we talked a little bit about this. Now, Lucas, you just lost Lucas. What I've seen a lot of times, and I'm so glad that you and your wife stayed together, but I also understand there's challenges that came with that as well, right? So take us back to there. And what was some of the challenges that you guys faced moving after the loss? And what steps did you take to stay together?
Yeah, that's a great topic because I don't know if these stats are accurate, but we've all probably heard like half of marriages end in divorce, and then and
Mhm.
75% they say of special needs family marriages end in divorce. I'm not sure that's totally true, but it felt like a likelihood. It felt like a pressure, right? That this could happen. This is out there. This is we have so much stress on us from medical care, and you're doing two jobs, right? You're not just parenting, you're caregiving. And I didn't know till after we lost him that I should be thinking of those as two separate things. It's not exactly the same. Of course, a parent takes care of a child and a caregiver takes care of a child, but it might have been helpful to for me to compartmentalize that a little bit. Anyway, the combined weight of both of those roles for both my wife and for me, I like to say we, hopefully I was, not like the disconnected dad. I think I was a very active, engaged dad. I was doing my share, um, and but I guess what kind of helped was um, when the weight would crush one of us. It never seemed to crush both of us at the same time. We'd have our moments, right? She'd stay strong when I was feeling down, and usually, if she was down, I was in a better place, and so we helped each other along that way quite a bit. Um, but then it also has a weird moment where you, I mean, can we both be down at the same time, or will it all blow up, right? Like, or if she's not down right now and I am, and I need to talk about it with her, am I going to bring her down, and can we handle that right now? So there was some tiptoeing around each other a little bit, but mostly we were, I think it was good for us that we had all the big picture stuff in sync. We had the same goals, we had the same approaches almost all the time. Sometimes she'd be a little more, I don't know, precise on something or demanding on something, and I'd be a little more flexible. And maybe that was good, because if I'm going to be flexible, she can make me go her way that she needs to be comfortable. So,
Right, right.
for example, in our son's care, he had to have catheters, and the urologist said every 3 to 4 hours. Well, in my wife's world, that is every three on the dot. You don't go to the fourth hour. You get it on 3 in 3:01, you're late, you know? And I would have been more mellow and casual about that. But good for us that she wasn't, that she was always on it. And sure enough, each follow-up visit with that urology specialist, he kind of almost in disbelief. He like, you guys are really good at this. You guys are meticulous. You don't miss one. You don't let it go. And like, well, you told us what to do. We're doing it. But
Right.
yeah, so we were pretty in sync and comfortable, and still so much strain, so much tension. And I say sometimes it was like you're always operating at that level that one more thing is what's going to break you. And
Right.
it it could be, and it often was, something like, oh, we got a flat tire. Well, so what? Everybody gets flat tires. It shouldn't be that big a deal. But for a flat tire to happen when you're already at your max, it
Mm,
just sets you off, right? And it could, and I hope not very often did it happen, that it was the other person that pushed you just that little bit, and then you lash out, and even my younger son, who was in more typical health, um, there'd be frustrations with any child, but then you think, you know, in this context, with this life and death situation for your sibling, and now we got to deal with your whatever normal stuff. I hopefully never said that, but he might have picked up on some of that stuff. And so there's a lot of tensions there, but I'd love to say that we got through it because we were always really openly communicating. We did some of that, but not, I think other people probably do a lot more. We were more, I don't know if it's intuitively in sync. I think that was our strength, that we were, um, without too much. I mean, certainly there were a lot of conversations, but without too much check-ins on how are you feeling, how am I feeling. We
right.
tended to be always moving in the right direction, the same direction. I think maybe it was partly that the situation was so life and death. You have to do these things these are not negotiable things. So there wasn't as much, I don't know, room to misunderstand each other or argue with each other.
Mm.
It was a pretty clear one path through. It felt like one path through this situation that we were going to have to go together. And so I don't know. Maybe we were lucky. Maybe we were extra compatible. I think we gave
Yeah.
each other a lot of grace, and I think that's the
Mm.
biggest key.
That's what I was waiting to hear right there. The grace part, because I have talked to a handful of couples since the last time that we talked. I'm constantly doing research, but I'm constantly curious. I've talked to couples who have just divorced. That was the that was the breaking point. They were like, don't want to do it. And you heard the horror stories as well, the fighting, the consistent fighting, the consistent blaming. And as men, and please feel free to chime in and let me know if I'm on the right track. But for men, we have a tendency when um, if we lose like loss of a child, it's easy for us to have a sense of guilt and shame. And speaking from a personal place, when my son passed away, I was there was this sense of guilt and shame, and the constant scenario building, right? The false scenario building. I was like, I wonder if this person is thinking about me, and what they're thinking about me. I just lost my child. Oh my God. I wonder what they're thinking about me over here. They must think that I'm a horrible parent, that, what I'm saying, this guy must think the less of me, that I couldn't protect my child. And, all of these different things, the woulda, coulda, shouldas, right? The what ifs, right? Only to find out that I was wrong, right? They were trying to figure out how to support me. And I'm sitting over there thinking that they're thinking the worst out of me, man. Was yours the same? Was yours the same way, or was it a little bit different?
Well, I came across this great quote about guilt along those lines. It says, "Guilt is only useful the first time," and it's
Mm,
Laurel Braitman that said that. She wrote the book, "What Looks Like Bravery," about the loss of her dad, and I, I took from that line. I think maybe this is what she meant, that if you have that feeling, that guilt feeling, is it gonna change what you do? Are you gonna learn from that? And if not, you're just ruminating. You're just dwelling on something. But
Right.
if you do it once and you learn from it, then maybe it's useful. But the other aspect that you're talking about, like what do people think of me, and I think I had this moment when we got Lucas's diagnosis that it felt, I've used the words, it felt like game over. Not like his
Mhm.
life was over or my life was over, but the games we play were over. The game
Right.
of I need a better house than you, or I want a better car than you, or well, all the things we think are important, maybe particular to the American, capitalist mindset or whatever. But
Right.
all those comparison games, what would my neighbor think of me, or what would my old friend from school think of me? Kind of none of that mattered anymore because, and this is terrible to say, but I had already lost the game. You told me my firstborn, my only, is going to go away. I'm going to lose him. What
Mhm.
what other game do I want to win when I can't win that one? Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's exactly what I was looking for, right? Because I'm glad that you put it in the terms of game over. What am I going to do now, right? Um, so now it leads me to my next question. Um, when it comes down to your friendship, your relationships with your friends, family, and you have another child, correct? You
Yeah.
know, and what did those relationships look like with your friends and family? But also, how was the relationship moving forward with your other child, right? Because they're grieving the loss over there. And the reason why I say this, right, is because when we think about grieving the loss of someone, we often forget how individual it is and how demanding it is. But on a simpler term, how selfish grief can be from one person to the next. Right, you and your wife can be grieving. You're grieving the same thing. You're just doing it in different ways, and it's easy for us to get wrapped up in our own individual grief process as we begin to try to make sense out of our new world. Right. So yeah.
Yeah. I think for my son, who the younger son, who he was surprisingly, I hate to say it, but good at this, better at it than his parents were. I think
Mhm.
and maybe it's because he spent his whole life with his brother, knowing his brother's situation, whereas we had with the life before children, thinking, we're going to have a normal, happy life or whatever that means, but not this medically extraordinary, complicated life leading to losing our child. But with um, my youngest, we had tried to be as early as for him it was age appropriate. We tried to be pretty clear, like saying things like Lucas won't live very long, and so he always knew that, or as soon as he could understand it, he knew that. And yet, even though we were trying to be very clear, what we thought was pretty clear about your brother
Right.
won't live very long, one day, I think he was about 7, he said to us, well, how will Lucas find somebody to marry? And we said, oh, we've misunderstood here, because when we said he wouldn't live very long, he won't live. Most people get married maybe teenager or maybe later than that, and he won't live
Mhm.
that long. So now all of a sudden he's thinking, oh, my brother won't live to be a teenager. And
Right.
that's
Right.
that's close in time to where we are now. So um and yet, so that was one of the sort of hiccups in the road with him, but he mostly handled it very well. And when the end was near, he at the age of 9 is sort of leading his parents. Maybe he's more clear-headed about it than we were. And he's
Right.
saying, what do you think we'll do? Because we're not members of a church, so we're not going to rely on the typical funeral ceremony that comes with the Catholic Church or the Jewish tradition or whatever. So
Mhm.
he says to us, what do you think we'll do for a funeral? or for a memorial.
Yeah.
And we had literally written that on a to-do list on like that whiteboard you keep near the refrigerator. And for years, yeah,
I
for
know,
years,
boy.
yeah, for years, that was a to-do item that we, of course, didn't have the stomach to get around to doing, plan your son's funeral arrangements, right?
Uh,
We should have. I mean, somebody told us that this is coming. You can prepare for it if you want to, and we didn't
right.
want to, so we didn't. And yet, here's our youngest saying, maybe you guys should plan this thing. And but again, it was COVID time, and people weren't going to gather for a community support kind of ceremony. So we ended up, at my youngest son's suggestion, it was to plant memorial trees in our backyard for his brother. And his
Huh.
ashes are in, yeah, his ashes are in the soil there near the trees. And when it came time to, put the dirt down and mark the occasion, I asked everybody, are we thinking we just stand here in silence, or does somebody want to say a few words? And they said to me, we want to do silence. So that's what we did. And then my youngest said, he's 9 at the time. He says, can you guys go away? I want to sing him a song. Oh, and we did. We went away. So I have no idea what that song was. I mean,
That
but
is amazing, right? Um, Now I'm over here smiling for what you just said about planting trees for him, because when Jake passed away, we did something really similar, right? But also I think when we realized that the impact that our children have had on other people's lives, it kind of makes you smile, right? It kind of makes your heart beats just a little bit slower with that little bit of compassion that you feel for it. So the day of Jake's tribute, I went up to the nursery. His mom was like, "Hey, let's go get some trees," because mind you, Jake and I, we love climbing trees, right? He taught me how to be a kid again, right? And where we lived at, trees all over the place. I'm like, "Hey, let's go climb them." Okay, yeah, we'll climb them all the way to the top, and then he would go, let's race back down. Well, I'm old. I'm not about to race back down. I've been to broke my neck. I ain't about to do that, right? So I let him go chase him down, let him go. And there was these huge, big blue spruces that just hung out. So the day of his tribute, go down to the nursery, and we order 70. She orders 75. I go there, they put 225 into my vehicle. So when I realized what they had done, now this is me, because they was like, what is this for? I said, it's for my son's tribute. He just passed away. We want to give out trees to the people who knew him. They were like, what made you think that? I said, because my son loved to climb trees. And these are his favorite trees. And we want to share it with other people. And that was his biggest thing. I want to make sure that I'm giving back to people. I thought it was the most beautiful thing. And he used to always say that before he passed away. And so now I got these trees and I'm driving back, and some just say count the trees, right? Count them. So I'm looking back and I'm counting them. I get to 75 and I turn back around. I go back to the place. I said, hey, I got 5 more of these containers right here with these trees. I only ordered 75. The guy looked at me and was like, why did you turn back around? I said, because you gave me more than 75, right? He goes, yeah, we knew that. But why did you turn back around? I said, because I'm honest, and I didn't want you to think that I was. And then I thought about what he had said, and he looks at me, goes, mm-hmm, right? So now here's the blessing. We get back to the tribute. There's 175 people that show up,
uh,
right? You know what I'm saying? Now I'm thinking he's 8. You don't know that many people, right? I should want to know more people than you. I don't. I really don't. You know what I'm saying? He showed me up. I was like, all right, you got this. We good. We good. I'm not even going to fight it, right? We good. And it takes me back to you, and I starts to smile when you say that, because of that journey, that moment right there. I'm like, I'm right there with you, brother. My heart is with you, and I can
yeah,
feel that.
I love that story that you just shared, because I think we go through these hard times and we can find uh, it can it it's it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for people around us to be their best
Right.
self. When if they know what we need, and like that, the person selling you the trees just wanted to do a good thing by you and by your son, and I had that with, Lucas, because he visibly, you could see he's in a wheelchair. His body's in a different position. He looks a little different, and
Hmm.
you would never think he was in typical health. I mean, so right off the bat, if you see us, your visual impression is they're dealing with something there.
Right.
And some people, unfortunately, even some friends will step away, but a lot of people step up, and not always the people you expect, and they come to you and they're so much more engaged than if I was just me walking down the street and maybe you ask me about the weather or something and we have two sentences of conversation and we're done. But now there's this entry point for our compassion, and they, take an interest, or they start a conversation that we probably never would have had, and usually find out that they're dealing with something too. Maybe it's not,
Right.
maybe it's a cousin, or maybe it's a mom or an older parent that's going through declining health or something. But um everybody, Robin Roberts says everybody's got their something, and
Yeah.
we're not always going to tell each other. But when you open the door somehow, and maybe it's this obvious sort of visual cue of here's a ill kid in a wheelchair, that creates these connections that a lot of times our regular life we just gloss by each other and barely connect with each other. So there were definite blessings to be had along this way, and
Yeah.
you get reminded how good people can be.
Oh man, that touches my heart because I believe the same thing. Um, and in the world that we live in now, I remember watching this on Ghostbusters, the first Ghostbusters, right? And what I'm saying, they were talking about the demigod. They were like, um, and they actually said it in War of the Worlds too, the one with Keanu Reeves. He goes, the professor says, I like to believe that in the time of pure need, people will come together in the precipice, right? And then it takes me back to that scene um in Ghostbusters where you got the Marshmallow Man coming through the city, raw, raw, and they zooming them and everything like that. But um you got the people singing, right? You know what I'm saying? Maybe I got maybe got the two Ghostbusters mixed up or something like that. But the singing and what I'm saying, giving the good vibes out there, and what I'm saying, they go like, yeah, and that's what it reminds me of. Listening to you talk about that, and the people that was around you, and we both understood, understanding what you're saying. Sometimes there's some people that leave, and there's some people that stay, right? And there's the ones that you think that aren't going to stay are the ones that stay. The ones
Yeah.
that you think they're gone.
Yeah.
Now, you wrote an article. You've done some amazing work. Like I'm over here reading this thing. You've been in story. You've been in one of your stories was one in the 2015 Rare Patient Story Award from Global Genes. Um, wow. And it was narrated by Oscar Mary McDonnell, right? You know what I'm saying?
Y-
How exciting is
Right.
that?
So yeah, so you mentioned two of the very first things I did. The piece I wrote, it was on a
Um,
blog called The Mighty, and it was actually called "How Parenting a Dying Child Changed All My Expectations."
mhm.
And I didn't know at the time if I was just writing that to get it out there, get it off my chest, put my thoughts into crystallized words, or turns out from the feedback I got from people's comments and stuff that it helped some other people, or they related, it meant something to them, and that made me feel like maybe it's worth doing, right? And I had some and that's the piece you referred to, that I got an award at Global Genes, and I should mention I now work at Global Genes. So all these years later, it came full
All right.
circle. But and Global Genes, for anyone who doesn't know, is a education advocacy organization that will prepare people with what they need to know about rare diseases. Um, so after that piece, and figuring out that maybe it serves a purpose in the world, I had a previous background in film and mostly movie marketing. And I thought, with such a small population that cares about Menkes disease, I can't do what or at least what I sometimes do. If it's a big issue, like there's not enough clean water in the world, or there's global hunger, or whatever, you think somebody else can handle that problem, not me. But with Menkes disease, I thought, there's so few of us. What are the chances somebody else has some filmmaking skills? Probably not. So if anyone's going to make this film, it's got to be me. So I made the film telling my
Right.
son's story, and a couple other kids with a story. And then, because I had done a little bit of work in Hollywood with, in particular, the show The Closer, I showed it to a friend who worked on that show. And he said, "Oh, it's touching, it's important, it's a good job, all this. If there's anything I can do to help." I said, "Well, could you reach out to your friend and the star of your show, Mary McDonnell, and ask her if she might narrate my film?" Because in the first draft that he saw, I was the narrator. I was more than willing to fire myself and replace me with her. And so
I love it, man.
she was very gracious to give her time and talent to that, and I was forever grateful for that, because it sort of, I don't know if it matters too much. I mean, obviously she's much better at it than I was, but also, her sort of name recognition. Some people are going to check out the film just because of that.
Right, right.
um, and all of that put me on a path that was, I was thinking of it as rare disease awareness, and it certainly was that, but it turned out that I was finding other people that wanted to tell these stories about rare diseases. And I met one of them at a Global Genes conference, Bo Bigelow, partnered with him. We started a film festival just for this, nothing but rare disease stories in film. And we, to be honest, in the beginning thought, are there enough of those films to fill a whole festival? But we found them,
Right.
and we made a
Oh,
couple of them. Yeah, we made a couple of them ourselves. We found some more. And then as the years go by, there's more and more of them. We keep finding them. And so we did two of those film festivals, and then a pandemic comes along, and film festivals aren't a good idea right then. So we
right.
thought, what could we do instead? And we did a streaming channel, which is the Disorder channel. So that you could get on a Roku or a Fire TV. And we now have about 250 different films and videos of people, very few of them made by us. Mostly we're collecting them and curating them.
Mhm.
But people telling their story of, I've got Batten disease, or I've got cystic fibrosis, or I've got Duchenne muscular dystrophy, or SMA, or there's 10,000 rare diseases. So our work's not even close to done until we've got 10,000 films, but we're making a small chip away at it. And then, most of those tend to be documentaries, and they can be a little heavy, a little sad. I will say almost all of them end on this note of hope, because these are amazing people they're not going to accept the reality as is. They're going to change the reality. They're going to make it a better place. And so that's nice. But we did know that a steady diet of kind of sad documentaries was a lot to ask of viewers.
Yeah.
So we kept looking for, could there be other stuff, fictional films that are still accurate to the science, right? So we have some narrative films that are about rare disease. We just added one called Bonus Time, about Lynch syndrome, is a genetic condition that predisposes you to get cancers. So it's about both rare disease and cancer. And it's a comedy of all things. Who would think cancer would be funny, but these guys did a great job. Um, and we might have the occasional thing that's animated, or a puppet show version of a story, and we're just trying to mix it up a little bit. And we actually added our own, the way John Oliver or Trevor Noah or Sam B would do a rant. um,
Yeah.
we do now. I'm part of it, and I have a guest come on with me. It's called Pain Points, and it's supposed to be, hopefully it's funny. It's a comedy type rant where we tell you, like, here's what we're up against, here's what we're dealing with. We're trying not to complain, trying to just to explain, but here's our reality. So
Yeah.
we're bringing into the mix some other things, but it is definitely primarily documentaries, very educational, give you a chance to have a window into someone else's world.
I love that, man. I definitely love that because I'm thinking about it. I'm going the last name kind of caught me by surprise, Lynch syndrome, right? Because my last name is Lynch. And I'm
Right?
going, oh, how in the world did my name become a rare disease? Like, okay, we don't have to talk to the person naming these diseases
Yeah.
and go, hey, what was you thinking? Right?
You
No,
know,
but
there's a joke.
but
There's a joke very much along those lines. It's like the doctor comes in and says, "I'm afraid you have a rare disease," and the patient says, "What's it called?" He goes, "You can decide."
you go ahead and decide this one for you, right? You know what I'm saying? Because we have no name for it. I think that is beautiful, man. And your accomplishments in bringing awareness to the rare diseases, right? Hospitals, maybe major movie studios, TNT, the Closer, HBO, all of these. You've been a very busy individual, man, and your track record is very impressive and awesome, right? You got the Courageous Parents Network, and it also says that you work for Global Genes. And I'm just looking at all of these, man. Like when you put together your resume and take this in there, Darty, looking at you going, "You got to be kidding me!" Yeah, come on, right? No, but
Well,
I say that to say, you know what? Well deserved.
thank you.
You know what I'm saying? Of taking the opportunity to educate people, bring awareness, and do so much to help those individuals who have or are experiencing loved ones with these rare diseases, right? You know what I'm saying? Because it's gentlemen like you that put yourself on the front line and go, hey, I know what you're going. I have a better understanding of what you're going through. What do you need to do? What are your next steps that you would like to do? And then taking them on that journey to actually help them that ease the struggle, right? You know what I'm saying? And I say that because when we get thrown into these things, you know what I'm saying, there's no blueprint. We kind of figure it out as we go along. And just like with the work that I do, it took a whole lot of stumbling and challenging to get to where I am. But I go, yeah, you may look at it the same way. I often tell them, say, hey, I struggle so you didn't have to, right? You know what I'm saying? And you got all of these individuals that are helping you bring that awareness out there. And I can only think to myself, like, what can I do to help contribute to keep bringing that awareness out here? Because there's so many people that I think, could benefit from knowing the information, that you provide. So, which leads me to the next question. How can people get a hold of you? How can people find you? And if a
Sure.
person wanted to donate, how could they?
They can definitely donate to globalgenes.org. And
Mhm.
you can find me, Daniel D at globalgenes.org, or you can find me, Daniel at Rare Disorder Film Festival, Disorder, the Rare Disease Film Festival. So let me say that again, Daniel at rarediseasefilmfestival.com, or thedisorderchannel.com. And yeah, when you talk about the people that need to know these things, one of the programs at Global Genes is called Know Your Family Health, because so often we might have a genetic history and maybe your parents weren't affected. So, or they weren't affected enough to be a problem, or maybe it's your
Mhm.
grandparents or great grandpa died mysteriously and we don't know why. Well, we want people to have more of those conversations. And now, 3 generations ago, you weren't going to get a genetic test, but now you can. So
Right.
if I get the genetic test from my kid, I should probably get it from me too. And then if my parents are still alive, I should check with them, because we never know, is some other cousin going to be affected, or who's maybe planning on having a family and they want to be prepared, like, oh,
Yeah.
I should screen for this. I never thought you could test ahead of time for that, and that I would have to worry about it or consider it. So that's one of the programs at Global Genes, called Know Your Family Health. And we're trying to reach out to more people and get them to have those. Sometimes it's a cultural thing where it's an awkward conversation and nobody
Mhm.
wants to think they're genetically responsible for somebody's bad health. There can be some stigma with that. But for me, the genetic randomness was a bit of a comfort. It took away the why me? You could ask yourself,
Mhm.
why me? Why my son? Why does this happen? And instead, it was more like 1 in 10 people get a rare disease. Oh, well, we are, you know, this happens to some people. We're some people. This happens to us. Not to say like I was okay with it and casual and easy about it, but it removed that. I think a lot of the why me question is rooted in a sense of unfairness. And
Right,
why did we ever expect things to be fair in the first place? But we do.
right,
I mean, little kids do, and probably us big kids do too. Um, but that sheer numbers game of genetics can go wrong for some people. You got to have a
mhm,
lot of genes go right to make what we call a typical person. And one little thing goes
very
wrong,
true.
and you start to learn what a big difference one gene makes, right? So, who knew copper was important? And turns out it is.
Right.
You know.
But and when you say that, right, I look at, because I was born with a disorder, sensory processing input disorder. Often people are misdiagnosed with ADHD, ADD, things like that. So it really goes unnoticed or misnoticed, misdiagnosed. And it's very seldom, right? Because no one in my family, and so I'm listening to you say, get checked, check your family and things like that. I didn't even know what it was until my son was diagnosed, and because I noticed that a lot of things that he had experienced, I had already gone through, right? And it's not one of those things. There's no medication for it, right? But it's not a deadly disorder, and I'm still trying to figure out why they even label it as a disorder. The thing is that you think almost 100 times faster than the average person. So you know what I'm saying. Imagine as a child, your brain is already developing, it's already moving 100 miles a minute. Now you add in another 100 RPMs on top of there, and that's what you have with the SPID. And the doctor told me, they was like, it's very seldom that it's passed down through parents into the children. And I went, well, I must be one of the 1 in 10 then, because my son has it. They tested him, and sure enough, he did, right? And I was like, go figure, right? And I thought it was the funniest thing, man. I was like, I looked at my bubba. I said, well, that's one more thing that we got in common. He goes, what? I said, we both pain in the butts. You know that, right? He just looked at me. He goes, no, I know you are, but what am I, right? Type thing.
Yeah.
um, uh, Daniel, thank you for being on the show today. And I always ask my guests this, before you take off. If you had any words to give to the audience today, what would you give?
Um, I think how. Let's say my story is an example of getting some real bad news, and it's hard to find the joy in that bad news. It feels like, so that is probably the realization I had to come to, and I hope others can come to, is that whatever amount of bad it is, there's probably still some joy in that life. And get ready for the two things, and be willing and open to the good that is still going to be there amidst all the bad. It it doesn't sound likely that joy and pain coexist, but they so often do. And maybe a twist on that too is, we say when we're grieving someone, we say part of me died with that person. And I heard this from David Kessler, who's the author on a lot of grief books. um, the opposite is also true, that part of him lives on in me. So yeah, part of me died with him, but part of him lives with me, and I gotta do that justice and make that work.
Yeah, I was just, speaking of David Kessler, a huge shout out to him. Um, Beautiful man, beautiful soul. I just watched the interview that he did not too long ago. He was talking about holiday grief, And I
Hmm.
also have a book over there too. I never met the man personally. I know people who have. I would love to meet the man. I'd love to have a conversation with him and just pick his brain about a lot of things along the way. I think we as men can actually benefit from having these conversations, especially when we're in the field that we're in, right? To make us better, effective comforters and communicators to the people that we're articulating this message to. And I think that you have a very, very huge, beautiful message. And like I said, we're going to do as much as we can to get that message out there because so many other people out there that are going through these things. I want to make sure that they know that you're there, and let them know that they have that support and people that understand what they're going through. And with that being said, Daniel, thank you. Thank you for having such a great conversation with me. And, for everyone who is tuning in or have tuned in, thank you guys for tuning in. And hopefully you guys enjoyed the conversation as well. And if you haven't already, go check out Daniel. His links are in the description down below. And if you guys just want to donate to support him and things like that, those links are down there as well. Do you have any books out?
I have not yet published any books. Maybe
See,
someday.
I thought you had a book out. I was like, oh, I don't want to miss anything, right? You know what I'm saying? That's why I was like, did you have one? That way, you know what I'm saying, I'm covering my butt just in case you did.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it.
Oh
Maybe
man,
someday. Yeah.
yeah. I'm looking forward to it, man. I'm looking forward to learning more, and also, let me know what I can do to help support and help bring awareness to that. As much as we need
Yeah.
to make sure that people know.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
with everyone, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for the support. And as always, this is going to conclude another episode of Brief Let's Talk About a podcast. And we still talk about child loss. So we have many, many more coming this month. And, we got many more amazing guests coming as well. And so you guys stay tuned until the next time. I am Tony Lynch. And you guys have a great night. Peace.